Hey everybody, welcome to the AzCDL annual dinner. Doesn't look like we're eating dinner, does it? No, we have pivoted like everyone else because of the crazy 2020 COVID season. We are doing our panel virtually, like so many other events that have happened this year. And these fine people would have flown in from all over the country, and we would have been able to meet each other in person. And we are sad that that didn't happen, but we are so excited that we have this awesome technology that helps us still meet here together. So of course, the AzCDL is the only Arizona civil liberties organization to get pro-rights bills introduced into every legislative session that the AzCDL has been involved in, and instrumental in the introduction and passage of so many important things, and is the reason why we have constitutional carry here in the state of Arizona. I am proud to be affiliated with the AzCDL. I try to help support them in every way I possibly can, and it was a tremendous honor when they asked me to please assemble a panel of my fellow 2A advocates from around the nation to talk about the topic of unity in diversity. And we talk so much about diversity, and sometimes I think we forget about, how much unity that brings about when people come from different life experiences and different perspectives, but yet we are shoulder to shoulder on the topic of our Second Amendment and how valuable it is to us as individuals. I'm going to go round robin here, introduce you to our awesome panelists. I will start with Chris Chang. Chris Chang is a self-taught amateur shooter who turned pro and is History Channel's Top Shot Season 4 champion. Chris is an advocate for LGBT and Asian interests in the firearms community and serves on the diversity and outreach committees for both NSSF and NRA, and is on the board of the Pink Pistols, the largest pro-LGBT Pro 2A organization in Arizona. In America. Welcome to the panel, Chris. So glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Cheryl. It's going to be a wonderful panel.
I am excited indeed. Next up, and if everybody's screen looks the same as mine, which I'm never sure about, is the Puerto Rican pistolero himself, Rolando Rolo de la Vega. Known as the Puerto Rican pistolero on social media, Rolo is a Puerto Rican-born 2A advocate who lives in Florida near Parkland. After the murders at the local high school, Rolo discovered the importance of speaking up to protect our constitutional protections. He and his wife began attending 2A advocacy events and have an ultimate goal to educate young Americans on the importance of defending their rights from government overreach, specifically within the Hispanic American community. Welcome to the panel, Rolo.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. And I did mention your bride, your lovely bride.
Yes.
And last but not least, we have Latina locked and loaded, Jo Rosalie. So known on social media as Latina locked and loaded, Jo Rosalie was inspired by the 2019 Second Amendment rally held in Washington, D.C. She and her husband live again in Florida near Parkland, and after those murders at the local high school, Jo discovered the importance of speaking up to protect our constitutional protections. Realizing that Latino American media often aligned her culture with the anti-gun sentiment, Jo focuses on destigmatization, gun ownership in both the female and Hispanic communities. Welcome to the panel, Johanna.
Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a tremendous conversation. So we're on different coasts, right? So we've got two Floridas, right? Mm-hmm. Chris, you're in California.
In San Francisco.
San Francisco, right? Right in the heart of the craziness going on right now with the civil unrest. And I'm kind of nestled in between in Arizona. So we're gonna have all our bases covered here. Johanna, I'll ask you first. How did you get into guns and into advocacy for the Second Amendment?
Well, as you mentioned, Rollo is my husband. Rollo actually was the one to first introduce me to guns. My family, I'm a first generation child, anchor baby, if you will. My mother's from Colombia, my father is Dominican. And even though they tend to have conservative values, once they come to this country, they started to become have a certain leaning towards a certain political view. And even though my parents had grown up with guns, they were pretty anti-gun. So I grew up with a sentiment of guns were dangerous. So once I got to start dating Rollo, he mentioned he was a gun owner, and I secretly always had the desire to try it out. He introduced me to my first gun. I shot my first gun and promptly, immediately bought my own first gun right after shooting the first time. So that was around maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, something along the lines of there. And I was a very casual gun owner initially for the first few years. And then Parkland happened. I actually was pretty close by. I was in Parkland, the city, even though I don't live near there. I'm a little bit more south, South Florida, closer to the Miami county line. But I happened to be there that same day, that same morning, out in an outdoor playground with my 2-year-old niece at the time. And it was just a few short blocks from the high school. So I remember afterwards just having all these emotions about feeling so irresponsible. I was not carrying at the time. And after that, I became much more passionate about always being ready to defend my family. That's kind of like what, started the ball rolling for both Rolando and I to, start thinking about how important guns were as a freedom and as a necessity, a tool for our self-defense, our protection. And we started getting more involved, seeing, the advocates out there. And then it all came to a head in November of last year with the Second Amendment rally in Washington, D.C. We were, I think, the first normal people who said, yes, we're going to go. And I think Rolando actually posted our tickets online, and the organizers commented that we were the first to say we were definitely going and show our reservations and all that. And it was definitely a life-changing moment. I got to meet Cheryl and a few other advocates who were our inspirations. Tony Simon, Katie, Argo J, Carrie Sloan, Tim Knight, Rebecca Schmoy. So we got to meet them that morning at a event that they had held. And it was just, hugely inspirational. And up until that moment, I had decided that Rolando was going to be the advocate and I was just going to support him because I'm a little bit more introverted and I'm not very open. I'm not someone who's on social media or anything like that. And then by the end of that weekend, after hearing everyone's speeches at the 2A rally, it was a completely different story. Sunday, I can actually tell you that was a Saturday. Sunday, we went to see the Bill of Rights. And I remember standing in that rotunda, that dimly lit rotunda, looking down at the Bill of Rights. And it was, I say it's kind of like a religious experience for me. That was the moment that I turned to Rolando and said, yeah, I'm going to do this with you. So 1 year later, we're doing speaking events. And I think we can say that we have a podcast and we do a lot of grassroots activism. So this has definitely been, whirlwind year that just shows me that anyone can get involved and make a difference in other people's lives.
Wow. That you just gave me goosebumps when you talked about looking at the Bill of Rights and when you're standing there in the same building with it. That so is powerful. And so Rollo, are you, would her parents think that you're a good influence or a bad influence with the whole gun thing?
That's a good question. I'm not really sure how they would feel about it. She might be able to answer better than I can. We don't really talk about about the advocacy too much with Johanna's family. It's more of they know that we own firearms, but they don't know that we live this other life on the internet now that we have advocacy and have a podcast and all that stuff. So they're kind of hands off when it comes to that. My family is, my father was in the military. We didn't own guns when we grew up. I guess I can kind of segue into how I got into guns if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
And my advocacy. And but I always grew up patriotic, believing the Constitution, obviously loving this country. I was born in Puerto Rico, but we moved pretty much all over the place after that. I lived in Japan, then moved to the mainland U.S. and have lived, in a lot of places until I went to college and my dad retired from the Navy. And I've been in South Florida since. And I think who really influenced me, like I said, my father never owned guns. He was never opposed to them, but it was just not part of our lifestyle or anything like that. And obviously we lived in a lot of countries where gun ownership would have been prohibitive, being in the military. And you can't even have a firearm on a military base to begin with, unfortunately. So really it was my friends. I was in high school when September 11th happened. I was a freshman. So a lot of my older friends that were getting ready to graduate enlisted in the military. Most of them joined the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. And a lot of them went abroad and they fought in the War on Terror. And when they came back, especially the Marines, because the Marines are always a little bit gung-ho. They came back and they're like, hey, let's take you guys out to the range. Let's teach you guys how to shoot. And that's what we did. And I remember the first time I went out to the range, I shot everything from basic like M92 Beretta pistols to Benelli shotguns, AK-47s and everything. And at that moment I was hooked. So I bought my first pistol. It was actually at the time, all my friends owned Springfield XDs. So I bought an XD45 at the time. That was my first handgun. It's actually the first gun that Joe shot. So I normally wouldn't recommend teaching people on a 45, but hey, once she started there, she had no issues. So it was pretty much
true.
It was pretty much casual from there. We were recreational gun owners. So it was really more, I owned my handgun for self-defense in the home, and I would take people out to the range. And I kind of influenced a lot of people to be positive with gun ownership, but I never really emphasized the Second Amendment at the time. It was more, we can own guns. It's perfectly legal. It doesn't make you a bad person if you have one. And I think that my demeanor and how I was with a lot of my friends, they're like, well, if Rolo owns guns, it can't be a bad thing because he's a really nice guy. So that's pretty much how I went from there. I met Johanna and it was pretty much the same spiel. And a few years later, like she said, Parkland really showed us that, well, Parkland showed me it wasn't necessarily the massacre. Obviously that was a tragedy, but it was what the politicians did afterwards that made me want to get into advocacy, because I already believed in firearms ownership and self-defense. But at that moment, when the fact that we had a Republican governor, a Republican legislature, and one of our senators, Rubio, at the time we had one Republican a senator to the U.S. Senate. They all turned on us and they voted red flag laws, and they increased the gun ownership, the purchase age to 21 years old for all firearms, not just handguns, which had been previously. And just seeing a Republican majority, and it was basically almost a super majority, do that made me realize that we have to defend our own rights, because the two parties, obviously one party's completely opposed to gun rights, but the other party, if they have any sort of fear, they'll abandon us in a second sometimes. So we really need to push and do the work ourselves to make sure that politicians don't infringe on our rights. And that's pretty much what pushed us there. And obviously the 2A rally afterwards was the icing on the cake, where we really got to meet you and a lot of other advocates that said, hey, you guys can do this, and you definitely should, because we need, we need a different group of people really pushing a Second Amendment advocacy. So if you'd asked us a year ago that we would be here today, I'm not sure I would have believed it. I think I would have been trying hard, but to have our own podcast and to, have been able to meet and have great relationships with so many great advocates and influencers really is beyond anything that we thought, and especially how supportive everyone's been.
Wow, that is such a powerful story, all the way from start to finish that you shared with us. And part of it is sort of this, coming out of the closet, if you don't mind me using that phrase. And of course, as we look to Chris to kind of ask him about his journey, and being a member of the LGBT community, that phrase, definitely is something that speaks to, if not you, then definitely a lot of your cohorts in that community, that it's so hard to be able to just be yourself in certain areas of our lives. And as we've seen it with guns, that, and so you're part of the LGBT community and you like guns, Chris. So talk to us about how you got involved in this advocacy and how your road was.
Yeah, my origin story, if you will, is kind of I don't know, it was unexpected in a lot of ways. And I'm a self-taught amateur shooter. I mean, I grew up with guns, where my father taught me how to shoot when I was 6 years old, but we didn't go shoot that often. I grew up in Orange County in Southern California. I mean, we only shot maybe once every 3 or 4 years. And it would be for an hour or two, rent a lane at the range, punch some holes in paper, and then the guns go back in the safe, and I wouldn't see them for 3 to 4 years at a time. But then this amazing show called Top Shot started airing in 2009, I think it was. And like millions of fans across the country, I would sit on my couch, every week and watch a new episode of these incredible weapons, these amazing challenges that, the Top Shot competition is essentially Disneyland for adults with guns. And most of the competitors come from law enforcement, military, Olympic shooters, lifelong hunters, and I was none of those things. But they have a few slots for self-taught amateurs, and so I thought, oh well, right, I think many of us have this fantasy of being on one of your favorite TV shows, and that was this fantasy that I had in my head. And long story short, I applied. They wanted me on the show. I trained really hard. I was working at Google at the time, and technology is that's my day job. That's my bread and butter. And so on top of my day job, I was putting in 20 to 25 hours a week of studying marksmanship and dry firing and just learning as much as I could about the finer points of guns and how to shoot a wide variety of weapons accurately, fire them safely. And so putting in that amount of time over, my training period for Top Shot was a 5-month period. And I basically treated training like a part-time job. And for me, Top Shot was just all about fun, right? How do I just go and have an incredibly fun time? I mean, these are the kind of life experiences that I think we should all aspire for, right? That when we all go to the grave, that we can say, hey, wow, I did some really, really fun things that are hopefully things that are really unique to each of us as individuals, right? I would love for everybody to be able to say, right, I did some amazing things that, right, not everybody gets to do. So I hope that for everybody, right, in your own personal lives. So long story short, right, I won $100,000. I beat all the professionals at the round game, and I quit Google to come into the firearms industry full time, but I didn't know a single person. And, bringing this back to diversity, I was, an out and proud gay man in Silicon Valley, but nobody knew who I was in the firearms industry. So, I had some fear and trepidation around, okay, am I going to run into a lot of anti-gay bigots or racist people who don't like me because I'm Asian, right? This whole firearms industry and community was extremely foreign to me. And thankfully, the firearms industry has been so welcoming, and not just the industry, but the community at large, right? I interface with thousands and thousands of gun owners and industry people, every single year. And, the predominant experience I have, being gay and being Asian is positive. And one nuance there is, within the LGBT community, for decades, we have been fighting for equality. And I think this concept of equality can mean something different to everybody. But for me in particular, equality means that I am treated the same as everybody else, which in practicality should mean that it doesn't matter that I'm gay, right? The fact that I'm gay, it shouldn't be interesting. It shouldn't be a topic of conversation. Me being gay should be as interesting as like me being a male, right? Or that I live in California, right? These are just sort of things. Okay, sure, they're all sort of part of who I am and my upbringing, but the fight for equality for LGBT Americans, we've made a lot of strides and a lot of progress over the past 5 to 10 years. And when I look at gun rights, gun rights, for me, I look at rights. Rights are rights, whether they're LGBT rights or gun rights. There's always a struggle, right? There's a struggle for people to retain those rights or to gain more freedom, right? And it's not about one group being better than the other. It's about equality, right? That gun owners, we want to be accepted, right, as law-abiding Americans like we are, and we don't want to be vilified, right? When Parkland happens, when Sandy Hook happens, when all of these like terrible mass shootings and other crimes take place, right? We the law-abiding gun owners, have nothing to do with them. But I think the narrative that a lot of anti-gun entities, the narrative that they tell is, if you don't support gun control, then you support the deaths of all of these children and other Americans, which is obviously just patently false, right? That is the red herring. That's not the narrative. That's not how I feel. I can say, right, that's not how you three feel, right? It's like, we don't support, right, the mass murder of anybody, right? That's not what our advocacy is about. Our advocacy is about our right to defend ourselves against a tyrannical government, to protect our families, our friends, ourselves when the government can't be there for us. And so I learned that if I don't speak up, right, I can't just shoot guns for fun anymore. Like, that was back when I was on Top Shot, like, right, that was a lot of fun. And yes, of course, I still do have a lot of fun shooting guns, but the fun is going to end if we lose our Second Amendment rights. So I have to insert myself into this conversation. And, when we all support each other, we're all a more unified voice that we can all move in lockstep forward and preserve and retain and gain more of our Second Amendment rights.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. And we are all individually, I think, ambassadors, right? So I would kind of be the ambassador for Betty Crocker and polka dots. So, kind
Which
of
is
the
amazing.
Thank you. I'm kind of the Betty Crocker of the gun world. And, Johanna, you are an ambassador for Latina women. And it's interesting that we kind of need those ambassadors. There's those stereotypes out there that if you're a gun owner, you're, probably 50 or older, you definitely male, probably white, probably got a beard, and most likely wearing camo. Well, none of us fit that, right? And so we do need ambassadors for people that feel like, well, when Johanna speaks, I feel like my voice is out there, that my voice is being represented and heard. And so, that goes for each of us here. But why specifically do you feel like Latinas or Latinos in general need that voice? What was missing that you fill? What void do you fill?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, where we do need to have, as silly as it may sound, people that represent you in a community. For instance, when I first started getting more into advocacy and looking to mentors, I followed women. I would find women, or I would find minorities that I felt like represented who I was more, and their voice might sound similar to mine. I've already experienced it where I feel like I'm, an infant in this community, but I'm already getting instant messages or DMs or whatever to my Instagram where somebody will just say thank you for being the voice, because I it's really nice to see someone like me. So it gets me all a little choked up when I get that, because you're right, we do need a voice out there. We do need people to inspire us to, hey, I'm represented in this community as well. The importance of bringing Latinos into the gun world, or into caring about their Second Amendment specifically, is that, for instance, let's look at statistics. In 2020, Black men and women bought 58% more guns in the first 6 months of 2020 than they did last year. Clearly, there is an opening for minorities, and women are getting more into being gun owners. I feel like Latinos are kind of, well, we are the largest minority in America. We represent 20% of minority, 20% of us the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the untapped population for gun owners. We need to wake people up. Like I said, we do have that tendency, once Hispanics come to America, to lean a certain way. And I personally think it is a bias in the news. I grew up watching Hispanic media, Latin American news in my household. And going back to my mom's house as an adult, once my eyes were open, I'll sit down and watch the news with them if they have it on. And I am shocked at how biased it is outright. And I think we see that in our own media now. You turn on CNN, or you turn on, read an article, and you'll see articles focusing on, let's say, a positive thing in the gun community. They won't say someone, defended someone, or, survived because of a gun. They will still call them the shooter or the attacker. So we have that a lot in the Hispanic community as well. And then we also have, I don't want to say peer pressure, but you can't have certain viewpoints as a Hispanic person without another Hispanic turning around and saying, that's not very Hispanic of you, or you're being racist, or, so we do need to destigmatize Latinos to be able to think for themselves and start thinking about why these freedoms are important for them.
Wow. So, Rollo, I'll go to you next. Why do you think there is this stigma, and what is it that maybe would make you not Latino enough or Hispanic enough to own a firearm and be vocally out there telling people that you own firearms?
One of the things that I think there's a cultural stigma when it comes to Hispanics. Obviously, I think that I'll start with that before I move on to my next point. But a lot of countries in Central and South America now, obviously I'm Puerto Rican, so we're part of the United States by default. So I was born a U.S. citizen and received a lot of the benefits that obviously come with that. So the experience of a Puerto Rican as being a Latin American is different than pretty much every other Hispanic in the world, because we are part of the United States. But we're still culturally distinct. We're almost semi-autonomous within the United States. We have our own culture. But as far as Central and South America, there have been so many left-wing and communist uprisings, dictatorships, and things like that over the years. And obviously a lot of the problems with drug cartels in Mexico, Central and South America, that I think a lot of the image with guns is that guns are a tool used by those in power. And typically in South and Central America, those in power are those who oppress you. So it almost has that, stigma that comes with it, because that's all a lot of Hispanic people have ever seen in their own countries. It's like, well, the government is going to come in, they're going to break down the doors, and they're going to threaten us with their guns. If not, it's going to be the criminals and the drug cartels that do it. And then when you come to the United States, obviously, I think I think the Democratic Party has done a very effective job over the last few decades of targeting minorities in general. And I think that, the Republican Party has kind of conceded that point in a lot of ways, where they're like, we can't win this, so we're not even going to bother. And I think that that's a bad approach. I think that we're seeing a change to that approach now, a little bit more. But it's definitely, you can see what each side politically has conceded and what they've treasured. And I think both sides have made strategic mistakes. I think that you can say that the right has cared about the Supreme Court almost to a fault, at the expense of the education system and entertainment and media. And the left has focused on that, whereas they have not cared as much about the courts, or the Supreme Court exclusively, and a few other things. So now you're kind of seeing both parties kind of panicking because they're seeing their blind sides and they're trying to go after it. Now, obviously, I think that the left goes after the right with a certain amount of vehemence. It's just, as a Hispanic, we've seen leftist politics for so long that there's really nothing that you can, as much as many Hispanic Americans vote for the Democratic Party, you see so many Cubans and Venezuelans that have come, especially recently, down here in South Florida, that they're like, no way, I'm not going to buy that. This is the same spiel that I heard from these guys, and then they took everything away from us. Look at Chris had the opportunity to compete with Gabby Franco. Gabby's a great inspiration, great competitor, and obviously a great advocate for the Second Amendment. And she tells her story all the time about how you used to be able to own guns in Venezuela, but then that was taken away from them. And she's very adamant about that. We see that from our local Venezuelan and Cuban population here. They know once they were disarmed, once they got rid of their ability to vote and things like that, and they conceded all of their rights to the government, they lost almost everything. And now that's why they had to come to the United States. It's not that, Cuba in the early 50s and obviously Venezuela up until 30 years ago, they were both extremely prosperous countries. You could argue that the people that lived there, they wouldn't have wanted to leave those countries, even to come to the United States, if it hadn't been for what happened to them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what we see a lot of it. And we see a split in the Hispanic community because of that.
So we're talking about, you could be accused of not being Latino enough or Hispanic enough. And, me as, the Betty Crocker mom, grandma person, there are whole swaths of people out there that, say, well, good moms don't have those terrible tools in their homes, right? And so there is a lot of cultural elements to this and cultural shaming that if you don't really have a solid foundation in your founding documents or in your own personal why to own a gun, I can see that it could be really easy to be swayed and feel like, if I do own a gun, I better not tell anybody, or maybe better just to be a good person, I just will avoid the whole thing. And then also vote other people's rights away. So that's the piece that it's like, if you choose not to own the gun, fine, but don't vote my choice away from me. And then going to Chris next, you shared something just very recently that was kind of, something that I had to pause and think about, because you had gone to the range. I think it was somebody that was brand new to guns. I don't know if it was a friend of yours or somebody that you just met there, but they shared something with you that I thought, boy, if one person vocalized this, how many people really truly have internalized these feelings. And I'll let you expand on this, but what I remember hearing you say is that this person had, gone to the range for the first time, fired a firearm for the first time, and when they got done, they were so relieved. And the reason they were relieved is because they thought, let me say it right, that they would feel evil and possibly want to go and commit crimes simply by having fired a gun, like it was going to somehow take control of their thoughts and make them be a completely different person. Holy cow. Can you expound on that and how you were able to walk that person through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this was maybe back in 2014, and I was taking two friends to the range. And when I introduce new shooters, to firearms for the first time, I usually like to bring, a small array of options. And for this group, it was a a Glock 34, a Benelli M2 12 gauge shotgun, and then my competition AR-15. And I talked to them beforehand. I'm like, hey, are these the kind of weapons that you would want to shoot? And they said, yeah, it sounds great. And so, I always usually start off on the pistol and then, go to the shotgun and then usually, kind of end with the AR because, back in 2014 and obviously even in today's time, it's a hyper polarized firearm. And I've taught hundreds of students, but this interaction was so notable for what you mentioned earlier, because after she had fired a few rounds from the AR-15, I do this thing as an instructor where if a student has never shot a particular gun before, we'll only load 1 to 3 rounds, right, in the magazine or in the gun, right, and kind of go bang, 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 and then safety on, gun down. And I always ask the student, how did that feel? Like I've asked that question numerous times to students, right? How did that feel? What did you think about that experience? And most of the time I'm expecting that was awesome as a response. Or some students have been like, oh, whatever, right? That just sort of, whatever, or I didn't like it. I've actually had a very small number of students say, oh, it's too loud, right? The recoil, or something more, I think, like technical related, right? It's more around like it's too loud, the recoil, the gun, powder in my face kind of thing. But yeah, this friend of mine, she turned to me and she just said, I'm thankful that I don't feel evil after shooting this gun because of everything that she's seen in the news. She was just expecting that pulling the trigger on a firearm, in the AR-15 specifically, was going to somehow make her a bad person, that she would somehow feel compelled to take that gun and go and hurt people and go and commit crimes. And right when then we had a dialogue where I'm like, well, that's not how this works, right? Like, I asked her, I'm like, do you feel safe right now, with me as your instructor? And we were in a closed range. I said, right, do you feel safe right now? Like, do you feel, I asked the question for my own safety. I'm like, you don't feel like you're going to want to go hurt anybody right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
let's do
me
a
and
question.
another friend of mine. Yeah. So, thankfully she said, no, I don't feel evil, and I don't feel like I'm going to go harm people just because I'm holding this AR-15. And I will never forget that training session, because that's the only training session where something like that has happened. But right, and like what you said is, hey, if one person vocalized that, that there are thousands of other Americans who have never shot an AR-15 or never fired a gun, and they are thinking the same thing. And maybe they don't know that they're thinking it, right? Sometimes you have a generalized fear or hesitation, but you can't necessarily put words to it. But I think the main point is this. We need to remember what it's like to not have shot a gun before. Right? What is it like to be a complete newbie at guns and gun ownership and gun culture? And I think too many of us sometimes get carried away when we're interfacing with new shooters, and we just get carried away with caliber and technical talk about guns, and right, like at a very high level, like guns are pretty frightening, right, for a new shooter. And we have to be able to connect to and relate to a new shooter who doesn't know anything, right? Maybe all they've seen about guns is death and destruction in the media, on TV, in movies. And this is the opportunity for all of us as responsible gun owners to demystify, to debunk, to make the shooting sports and gun ownership more accessible. And so much of that is, it's sort of just like anything else. If you don't know, if you lack knowledge about a topic or a tool or a process, education is the key. Once, right, we learn how to do something, right, once you learn how to safely handle and operate a firearm, a lot of that fear goes away. And that's the key to growing our sport and to securing the future of our Second Amendment rights is we need to always be recruiting new Americans, right, into the shooting sports, into gun ownership, because right, one day our generations, we're all going to die, and who's going to be left? It's the generations after us. So it's a continual challenge, and it's a struggle to advocate for our rights, but that's what life is, right? No one's going to do the hard work for us, and we have to be vocal and stand up for the things that we believe in.
So beautifully said, and such important points. And how much credit I personally give to your friend who must have had such a level of anxiety and fear about the tool, and yet still trusted you and came to the range and put themselves in that position to do something that they thought might actually change their core being. So that is how powerful it is to invite people to the range and help them to understand more about the tool and what we value in that. Do you agree with that, Chris?
Indeed. And I'm a huge advocate around showing, not telling. And what I mean by that is, right, we can all talk ourselves to the wee hours in the morning about why gun ownership is important and why it's a fun activity, and there's community, and there's right, but there's just nothing, I think, that replaces actually bringing a new shooter to the range and having them experience, because humans, we learn by doing. I think that's really the core, that's the primary thrust of education, is we have to do the thing. Yes, of course, right, talking about it is important and reading about it, in books and such, but really going to the range and is a huge, it's a huge factor that can sway opinions, and then people can make an opinion for themselves about their own experience, right? They can then judge their own personal experience shooting a gun versus me or anybody else explaining, right, my experience, right, and my experiences are mine. So yeah, every year I try and bring at least 4 to 5 new shooters, my personal friends, to the range, because that's the grassroots way, right? That this is going to be successful. Is each of us has to commit ourselves to introducing new shooters to the sport.
Wow. Well, I congratulate you for that, and your friend for saying yes. Coming back to Johanna, and I'm going to probably round robin this next question, but I want to start with Johanna, because you had mentioned early in our conversation that there was something so powerful about being in the building with our Bill of Rights. And so many people have never actually read the Constitution for themselves and read the Bill of Rights for themselves. And I always like to hold this up on camera and show, this is not a war and peace document. This is, a very small document. It was written for people to the common person to be able to understand it. And the Bill of Rights is actually the firewall, right? That says, this is where the government can't intrude. And the Second Amendment is part of that. And the Constitution and Bill of Rights were written for everyone. It was not at all intended to be a political document. And yet we have seen the Second Amendment turn into a political football now. And as Rolando had mentioned, that, it's not just that side, it's not just the people with the D's on their chest that are, not supporting our Second Amendment rights. Sometimes it is the people with the R's on their chest. And we have to make wise decisions about who we vote for and what bills we support with our vote and that sort of thing. But I guess what I want to ask each of you is where are we in the conversation? And maybe more importantly, how do we extract politics? How do we get the grip of politics off of our founding document and our Second Amendment?
Oh, you're 100% correct on that. The Second Amendment should not be a political issue, but this is probably the most pivotal point in, I think, that the Second Amendment has had, at least in recent years, for obvious reasons. You know, one of the candidates for the presidency is making it a huge issue, you know, part of his platform for his presidency. And I think we've, you know, everybody who's watching this probably knows what I'm talking about or knows the specifics. So how do we make this not a political issue? Well, definitely is by educating people on the Constitution, and what it means, what it says. One of the things that Rolando and I do on our podcast is the end of every show, we actually do one amendment every week. And he goes over it in English and I go over it in Spanish. And it's just an education thing, like you said before. You just need to educate people on, you know, what our backbone of this country is and why it's so important. And also, another way to make it not political is to, I guess, take the politics out of it when you talk to people. If you're talking to a woman, you know, or a minority who's, you know, in the LGBT community, it's been, you know, a huge issue with violence against gays and all that. You know, make it about things. If they're a mom, make it about, you know, your kids and keeping them safe. Make it a self-defense thing, at least to get them in the foot in the door. As I mentioned, my family is pretty anti-gun, but that's not really changing. But I am really, really proud that I have one family member who was previously very anti-gun, who this year, because of the civil unrest, I've always been one of those people who have the door open, who've dropped seeds, you know, like to kind of, if you want to talk about this. And she took the bait and she came to me and said, "Can you help me?" So she's now a proud gun owner. And we've trained her. We've took her to the range a few times. We did a lot of education with her. And, you know, that's a huge win for us. It's just one person, but in my family, that's just an amazing win. And it may not start as a political thing, but you got to do what you got to do. And I think eventually they will take that journey themselves to figure out that it will, you know, unfortunately it is a political thing and they will have to fight to keep that newfound right that they have discovered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rolando, what do you say about that? Where are we in the conversation nationally, and how do we get the talons of politics off of our rights?
I think that we're in an interesting place because I think we're simultaneously in the renaissance of guns and gun ownership. I think that you know, more people in the United States own guns more than any period in history, and it's not just on, you know, the super collectors, like people that have more than like the average amount of guns. So people that have more than 10 guns, it's not just people like that, you know, we have all the guns stockpiled and there's only like 50 of us, but we own like 1 million each. No, it's really that most or something like half of Americans, I think, may own firearms owners. And so that's really how you make it less political, because most of those people are probably not just Republicans. You know, a large percentage of them are probably apolitical or Democrats outright. So already there you can say, hey, there's people on every side of the political spectrum that own firearms. And considering how many millions of firearms there are, if they made people evil or caused them to do crazy things, we'd all be dead. It's just a fact of the matter. None of us would be alive because there's more guns than people here in this country. So that's really one way, just kind of rationalizing it, getting it there, and really letting people know the truth. I think in Florida, something like 1 in 6 Floridians has a concealed carry permit. So knowing that, sometimes the approach that I have is, you know, that 1 in 6 of the people that are around you right now probably have a firearm on them. And they're like, oh my God, I never knew that. And it's like, nothing's going on, is it? Nobody's going crazy or doing anything. And by the way, I'm one of those people. Oh my goodness, no way. I was like, I didn't do anything crazy. You've been hanging out with me the whole time. So that's definitely one approach. But again, I think even though we are, like I said, in a Second Amendment renaissance, the other side is also in kind of their own, I wouldn't call it a renaissance because that's a pretty positive term, but they're extremely vehement. They're more vehement about the cause than ever. And I think it has to do with social media galvanizing us and basically taking everybody to the extreme. And I think the other thing that the internet does is, even though when you look at statistics, obviously 2020 is an unprecedented year. So the statistics from this year are not really going to fit with any other year as far as crimes and murders and things like that. It's going to be an outlier year. And hopefully it's not a shape of things to come. But really prior to this year, you can see violent crimes have decreased. Murders have decreased overall, especially with firearms. And so you're seeing violent crime everywhere, not just the United States, pretty much all over the world. Conflict has been reduced. People are dying from violence a lot less. It's really one of the most peaceful times in history. But because we have 24/7 access to everything that goes on, sometimes we, especially the media, decides to consume us into negativity. So every day you're going to find, of course, in a world with 6 billion people or even a country with 350 million people, there is somebody who's going to die that day because somebody else decided to commit a crime or murder. And the likelihood is that a lot of those cases, somebody will use a gun. But when you see statistically, it's like, well, the percentage of you even being in an armed altercation as a civilian to defend yourself, let alone you be the victim of a violent crime, it's extremely low. So really, we need to put into perspective to people that the world is not how it is portrayed on the internet or in media. When we walk out in the street, most of our neighbors aren't that crazy person. They might vote for the other side, but they're not this crazy person that's out on the street throwing firebombs, or on the opposite spectrum, we're not a crazy person going out and shooting people. And I think putting that into perspective is something that we really have to work on. It's easier said than done, but I mean, look at where we've come from here, the different backgrounds that we have. It's definitely possible. And I think it's up to people like us that really bring a very almost casual, we speak about guns casually, like it's not even a big deal. So not even a big deal in a positive or negative way. So you just show people like guns are just guns. Like it's not a big deal. And sometimes almost minimizing it in a way makes people think like, you know what, maybe it isn't that big of a deal. I should try it out. And you know, that's kind of an approach that we've had.
Absolutely. You hear the phrase a lot, if it could save one life, right? But, and you've heard it used so that, you know, so no bad person would ever again take a life with a gun. But what's ignored is the 2.5 million times every year that guns are part of saving lives and defending life. And so, you know, we could probably use that phrase ourselves to help people better understand the positive side of gun ownership. So Chris, I'll throw it to you. Where are we in the conversation, and how do we depoliticize it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think Joanna, you know, had a really great thought around, you know, we really need to have conversations that aren't political, right? It's sort of like, okay, if we want to depoliticize a thing, then it's reframing the Second Amendment and gun conversations where it's not about politics. For me, it's more about how do we resonate and how do we connect with an individual's personal values, right? And because I think what annoys me in general about politics is if you're a Republican, you're supposed to be pro in support of all these things and against all these things, and then right, almost vice versa, right, on the Democrat side of things. And if you don't fit all of those, right, if you don't check all those boxes for either party, then you are, you know, less loyal of a Republican or a Democrat. But it's, but right, it's like, it really, for me, it's not about political parties, right? I mean, our Constitution and the values that our country were founded on aren't driven. They shouldn't be driven by political party ideology, right? So something like freedom, right, and the Second Amendment and our free right to defend ourselves shouldn't be politicized. So how do we effectively talk? Let's drill into Asians, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one challenge with a lot of Asian Americans is they're just apolitical, right?
Mm-hmm.
That they are not involved in the political system, because a lot of Asians just look at politicians and the government and say, well, what do I need them for? I mean, that's one great thing about Asians is they're very self-sufficient, right? That we don't rely on the government to help us with things. We're just going to do it ourselves, right? The government's just like going to probably get in the way of things. And so it's sort of understanding some of the nuances of, you know, Asian culture, or, you know, Latino culture, or African American culture. I mean, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one lens, right? To look at how do we talk about firearms ownership. You know, if you look at Korea, Korean Americans, and particularly back in the 1992 Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, a lot of Asians don't know about what the story is, which is in the middle of the LA riots, right? Rodney King was a black man. He was beat up by 4 white LAPD officers. And when the acquittals came down, right, freeing these white officers, I mean, LA went into multi-week riots. I mean, it was a total just race riots. LAPD, the National Guard, they were all overwhelmed and they couldn't protect communities.
Mm-hmm.
So the Korean American community, they were under siege, right, during these riots, and they contacted LAPD saying, the riots are coming, they've got torches, they've got guns, they've just all sorts of bad stuff, please come and save us. And LAPD said, we can't. We're overwhelmed. We don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So what did the Korean Americans do? They took their own personal firearms, and they went to their places of business and guarded the roofs, guarded the entrances, did perimeter patrols. They were guarding their own houses. They took matters into their own hands. And the only reason they were able to do that is because of the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking to Asians about why the Second Amendment is important, I think it's really important to tell stories, like parts of history that directly relate to that particular demographic of person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, Koreatown, there's a whole meme of rooftop Koreans.
Mm-hmm.
And so, right, everybody should like embrace their inner rooftop Korean, which is, yeah, it's fun and funny. But then on the LGBT side of things, you know, there's this political overlay that in order to be a good gay, you're supposed to be anti-gun,
Mm-hmm.
that you're supposed to look and think a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And being pro-gun, or, you know, being pro-freedom sometimes is just like not a thing that LGBT culture promotes all the time, which is a little, it's paradoxical when, right, a lot of gay people, right, we've been in the fight for freedom and equality, for gay rights for decades, yet it's not all freedoms, right? It's only LGBT freedom, but if you fight for other freedoms, then you're a bad gay. So there's this dynamic in the gay community where I know lots of closeted gun owners in general, but then in the gay community, yeah, like I know a lot of gay people who own guns, but they're closeted. And so back to, right, we need to resonate and really tap into the essence of who the individual is at their core. And essentially it's about giving people the confidence to think and live how they want, right? That I don't live my life conforming to popular culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? Gay culture tells me that guns are bad. I don't care. I don't care that gay culture tells me that guns are bad. I'm going to think for myself. I think guns are neutral, right? Guns can be used for good and for evil, but they're not uniformly bad, right? That's something I'm just not going to listen to about gay culture. So a lot of this is it's about self-awareness, helping people self-actualize, meaning that they discover for themselves who they are, that they don't let political labels dictate what they're supposed to think or feel or how they're supposed to vote, or in the case of Asians, we just need to get more Asians to care about government, about electing officials that want to, support the Second Amendment, that want to support freedom, that want to support furthering ethnic communities and in minorities in particular. So that's sort of my thoughts in a nutshell on that topic.
No, I think very well put. And since you are part of different communities, it's interesting to see that juxtaposition, between, and I was unaware that the Asian community is basically like, hey, if you want to get something done right, do it yourself. We don't need the government involved here. So maybe I'm secretly Asian. I'm not sure. I might be. And so we need to start wrapping up, but I want to ask each of you again, and I'll start with Johanna. What do you think the current gun community, which even that, like what the heck is the gun community? Because we are all so unique and so different. But again, that shoulder to shoulder valuing our Second Amendment. What do you think that we can do to help welcome in the millions upon millions of brand new first-time gun owners who in the year of 2020 have made that important first decision? And, specifically, if you want to talk about specifically to women or minorities, what is it is it something that we're doing now that we can get out of our own way and stop doing it? Or is there something that we aren't doing that we maybe could start doing?
First, I want to say that regarding the gun community, that's actually something that I think a lot of people within this 2A community does not realize, that this is actually, the 2A community is a minority within the gun, if you want to say the overall gun community. I know plenty of gun owners that don't care about the 2A. I had a conversation with someone I hadn't seen in years that I knew was a gun owner. And he said, hey, what are you up to lately? And I said, well, I've gotten into Second Amendment advocacy. And he said, what is that? So I'm like, what do you mean, advocacy or the Second Amendment? So he felt embarrassed once he realized, like, oh, I guess. I guess I know what that is. So, a good way to like visualize that is look at social media. You can see accounts that are like strictly really cool gun pictures or pretty women with guns. They'll have hundreds of thousands of followers. And then you see some accounts that are more, focused on what's going on politically, the fight for the 2A, and it's a much smaller following for that. So that's the first thing that we need to realize, because a lot of people don't realize that just because you're a gun owner doesn't mean you know anything that's going on and you care about it. So first step is to get people that are, okay, now congratulations, welcome to the gun community. Okay, this is why you should start caring. So education, having those conversations. So if you happen to know Sally down the street now has a gun, she's new. Yeah, she's getting training and all that, but maybe you need to go and have those conversations with her about, this is what's been going on. This is why it's really important to start caring, because we might not be able to have these things a year from now or 6 months from now, whatever it may be. In terms of getting in our way, I actually heard this a lot at GRPC as advice. And I quote, I heard it several times, specifically said this way: don't be a jerk.
Sometimes it gets more colorful than that, but yeah.
Yeah. And I see this online too. I see this all the time. People just saying things, that they don't realize are not going to be welcoming to the new person. Whether it's making fun of someone for the holster that they bought, or, you don't know what this is, like, oh, are you even a gun person? No, maybe they bought their gun last week. They didn't have the luxury of growing up as a gun owner, shooting from the age they were 2, or whatever it was that, some of these people have the privilege of being gun owners or introduced into this community very young. So we just have to be more aware of that, be more welcoming, careful of our language, careful of making fun of people, educate people. And if you are if you are the administrator or moderator or if it's your account on social media where you see someone being a jerk, you know, kick them out, delete the comment, make it a welcoming place for new people.
Wow. You covered a lot there. That's brilliant. I hope people are taking notes because those are all great suggestions. Rolando, what do you say? How can we do a better job? Are there things we should be doing or things we should stop doing that will make us a more inviting group for new gun owners to come in?
I think Joe covered a lot of it, but I also think that you know, some things that we can do better. Like she said, we get into a lot of matches about irrelevant things on the internet, and sometimes people are pretty adamant about it, whether it's AR-15s versus AKs or 1911s versus Glocks. You know, those are some of the dumber conversations that we get into. But again, maybe not making it political, making it about your rights, your freedom, encouraging people to say, hey, you bought a gun, you shouldn't feel uncomfortable about it. You shouldn't feel ashamed that you made that decision or that you were backed into a corner. You made a rational decision as an adult. So let's see how we can turn this into a positive. And we also have to realize that they're buying guns for different reasons than maybe we bought guns. So they're going to see the gun as a tool. So we have to understand that there's different levels of advocacy, commitment, enthusiasm when it comes to guns. For most people, and I kind of use the example of the NRA with this, that the NRA is the boogeyman for the anti-gun groups, but they have 5 million members and there are probably 160 million gun owners in this country. So they represent an extreme minority of a large group of people. So that what the NRA does, or you know, they don't dictate all gun owners, and most gun owners probably don't even know what the NRA does, for better or for worse.
True.
You know, and so I think that's something that we need to use, that approach, that we have a lot of enthusiasm, but we need to approach these new gun owners as they bought this as a tool to defend themselves, most likely. So that's the way that you need to speak to them about it. You need to make them feel comfortable about it, let them know that they're safe, and also be realistic. I think sometimes I've seen, one of the things that I hate is when we start using political correctness sometimes to our detriment, kind of like what the other side does. So Joe will tell you this, there's one term that bothers me, and it's a really dumb term, and that's the term MSR when referring to AR-15s. It's a modern sporting rifle. I was like, we don't need to use semantics. That's what they do, because they treat people like they're not adults. It's a gun. Guns are used. What was the purpose of a gun? Guns were used to defend people, and essentially it's a weapon. It's a weapon. It's meant to you know, inflict damage. You know, it's meant to kill. That's usually what it is. That was the primary purpose. And I think we need to be realistic about that, but also say, yes, but it's like anything else. It could be a sword, it could be a shield, it could be a bat, anything like that. So it's just a tool that's effective. Now, the cool thing about guns is that they can also be used recreationally. They can use to gather food. So it's a versatile tool, but you know, we also need to be realistic about it. Like, I won't sugarcoat what a gun is capable of doing, but I also won't exaggerate what it can do. You know, some people act like when you fire a gun, it's going to kick you back or it's going to blow somebody apart when they get hit. But then, you know, sometimes you have to show people, well, why would you want a standard capacity magazine? Well, here's a video of a police officer or just a normal civilian dealing with somebody, and they had a handgun. They emptied every shot they had. That person still did not go down. Or they were attacked by multiple people. So they maybe were able to take care of one person, but now they're dealing with multiple threats. And, you know, having 5 shots in a revolver is not going to be good enough in that situation. And when you start rationalizing it, people are like, you know what, you're right. It's like, think to yourself, can you handle fighting against one person? Maybe if it's a man, they'll be like, yeah, I can take on anybody. What about 2 guys? Well, it depends. What about 3? Well, yeah, I don't think I can do that. It's like, well, wouldn't you like a force multiplier in that situation? Would it be wrong of you to ask for that? You know, is it more wrong for you to say, I want to live and I want to have a tool that allows me to live? Or is it more wrong for somebody to say, well, if you can't help yourself, you just need to roll over and take it? You know, what's the moral? What do you think is more correct morally when it comes to that? So you have to be encouraging, show them that's not bad, but you also have to treat people like adults and let them know the truth. Like, you got this for a reason that was a very, you know, it's a heartening reason. I want to protect my life and my family. That's a serious thing. So you have to treat it as a serious conversation.
Absolutely. And, you know, before all of this civil unrest and the rioting and the stuff going on in different cities across our nation, where there are just masses of people who are moving in concert together, before that was on our TV screens, if we would ever have conversations with people about, you know, well, there could be multiple attackers. You could have a home invasion where there are multiple people breaking into your home. People were like, yeah, but that doesn't happen. You know, like they had a hard time even visualizing that. And now we have, you know, hours upon hours upon hours of footage on, you know, our social media and our TV screens to show us that, yeah, that does happen. And, you know, to limit somebody's magazine capacity in just kind of an arbitrary way, like, yeah, 10's gonna be plenty, and if you need more than 10, then there's something wrong with your aim, or, you know, something like that. I think that can change the logic um, stream in people's minds now. And then the other thing you touched on is insider lingo. OMG. And now I'm using an acronym. That makes me crazy. You know, that MSR, modern sport. Just say what you mean, because, you know, in different settings, a different acronym, you know, an acronym can mean multiple different things, you know,
Well, it's
before
like the term
all of,
assault weapon. They
yeah.
use assault weapon. So it's like, why do we need to make up words? They're making up plenty of them. Just say what it is. It's a semi-automatic rifle. So,
Exactly. And, you know, before the conversation around Black Lives Matter became a national thing, when I heard BLM, I live in Arizona, it's Bureau of Land Management. So I still, you know, when somebody says BLM, like my brain goes there first. And I'm like, they're doing what? They're rioting? The Bureau of Land Management is rioting? Oh, wait, no, the other. Okay, got you. But I just think if we speak plainly to each other, we're going to get a lot farther in the conversation. So, Chris, I'll throw it to you. How do we do better in communicating to people, to inviting people in, and removing barriers?
Yeah, so I've got one thought on how do we do better, and a thought on what do we need to stop doing. So the first question, leaning into education, I'm reflecting back on a video series that I made with the NSSF. We've got about like 30 new shooter videos. And when I was crafting, you know, what kind of new shooter videos would be interesting, you know, I really wanted to go back to basics. And when I say basics, I mean like uber basics. And so there's one video in particular that I made that I had a lot of fun making it. And the topic was so simple, was how to load a magazine. How to load a magazine, right? So anyone who's ever taught a new shooter doesn't understand which way does the magazine go into the gun and which direction do the rounds face in the magazine. And I remember Googling and searching on YouTube for other like beginner 101 videos on how to load a magazine. And at the time, there just weren't that many. And that was jaw dropping to me, right? That we have these huge video platforms, right? And opportunities to educate new shooters. But we're not talking about one of the most fundamental parts about how to use a firearm, which is just simply how to load a magazine. So I think we need to do, you know, not just more education, but again, we have to really think about what does a new shooter need to know and understand just to pull the trigger, right? That how do you load a magazine? How do you hold the gun? Where does your finger go on the trigger? Like there's some of these like super basic things that I think gun owners, we know them a lot of this instinctively, but we sometimes gloss over a lot of these details, and maybe we get wrapped up in lingo or technical talk about caliber and this and that. But I really want to encourage us to go back to basics and put ourselves in that new shooter mindset. So one thing I think we need to do less of, which I think we need to stop being quiet. I think there are too many gun owners who are silent and very passive in the whole discussion and the fight for our rights. Those of us who are quiet are going to let you basically are letting other people do the talking for you, whether it's on the pro or the anti right gun side of things. And so we have to stop being quiet. We have to stop letting other people think for us. We have to stop letting other people talk for us and make decisions for us. And the only way that stops is if we are more vocal about our rights and the things that we believe in. And silence is compliance.
Mm.
That's what this boils down to. And I don't think anybody wants to let their rights go away. But I also understand the reality is it can be very difficult to speak up on behalf of your Second Amendment rights, because what does this look like? It's Thanksgiving family dinner where you have an anti-gun relative who starts taking everyone to town about how guns are bad. Now that's your opportunity to maybe speak up. I would like to encourage everybody to speak up when you can, but that's the rub, right? That these conversations are often very uncomfortable. But right, if we're gonna make progress, you gotta have the courage of your convictions.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what you're talking about also. But I think most importantly, you have to speak up, and so that's what I want to encourage everybody to do more of is speak up on your own behalf, on your own rights, and obviously the rights of the rest of us in America.
Boy, that is so true. And, you know, I've had a few experiences myself. One was I was in the office of a city official. It was on something completely unrelated to my 2A advocacy. We own two businesses in our city over here in Avondale. And I was in a city official's office, and that city official said something about, you know, well, nobody needs that AR-15 and you can't hunt with it because if you shoot the bird with it, the bird's going to just explode into a million pieces. And I was like, okay, what hat am I wearing right now? I'm actually representing the Chamber of Commerce. I was actually representing at the time. I was on the board at the time. So I'm like, okay, do I just let that go? How do I just let that go? And anything that I do say, is it going to sound argumentative, you know, because there wasn't like an opening. It wasn't like there was a curiosity at the end of the sentence. And so some of those things on the Thanksgiving table, that can be really hard to maneuver because, you know, if you let the relatives say whatever and let it go, then you feel dishonest inside of yourself. But now if you speak up, you're the one that started the argument because you should have just let it go.
Yeah, but right, silence is compliance, right? If there's no counterpoint, then we give our power away to the people talking. And then the people who are listening, right, they just say, oh, sure, everything that person just said about all the bad things about guns, oh, that makes sense. I didn't hear any counterpoint, so therefore everybody in the family must be on the same page. And that's not always the case.
Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So it can be tricky, but I agree with you. We've got to find our little phrases that we can come in with, even if it's something like, you know, if somebody tries to gossip with me about a human, a friend, you know, and I usually say, oh, well, that hasn't been my experience. And then sometimes I just move right on, you know, or they're curious and then we go further, but I just kind of keep it as, oh, well, that's not how I've experienced that situation or whatever. But that's very wise. We should be thinking in terms of that. Well, we need to start wrapping up. This has been absolutely amazing. You never know exactly where the conversation's going to go. And it was so rich. It was so filled with wonderful wisdom and nuggets that I do hope people were taking notes. And since it's video, you can go back and watch it multiple times and share it with your relatives before Thanksgiving, maybe. I mean, who knows? But since we are being hosted by the AzCDL, the Arizona Citizens Defense League, obviously, to those of us on this panel, we do understand the importance of the individual being involved in protecting our rights of all kinds, including our Second Amendment rights. But what would you say, and I'll go round robin, ladies first in this, and ask you, so membership in an organization like the AzCDL, why is that important in enacting our individual advocacy for the Second Amendment?
Sure, that's a great question. Basically, organizations magnify our voices. So it's really important to always have membership to things like AzCDL and any of the other wonderful organizations that do things to help preserve our Second Amendment, FPC nationally, things like that. Very important because not only are they amplifying our voices and bringing what we believe and what we want, our desires, to, the forefront of politicians who are shaping our rights, or whether that's, taking them away or allowing them to be. And it also does they do other things. They help protect us, and if there's lawsuits or things like that. So we definitely have to be active that way. Memberships, donations like that.
Thank you. Rolando, what do you say about membership?
I think it's extremely important. And one of the things that we've seen is that it's very difficult to enact national gun control. So a lot of the anti-gun organizations have been focusing on the state level. And that's really why we have to focus, especially on these battleground states. Especially a state like Arizona or Florida, where we come with, sometimes our gun culture, look what happened to us in Florida. We were called the gunshine state for years because we were the first state to have concealed carry licensing. We've had pretty lax restrictions in comparison to most other states. And after Parkland, everything changed. And now we're pretty much middle of the road. I would say that we're mediocre at this point because red flag laws are more, really more heinous than almost anything else besides actual confiscation from anyone for any reason. So we really need to focus on our local and grassroots because that's where they will always have the most success and your voice is most amplified. The further away that you get from where you live, the softer your voice is, literally and metaphorically. So that's the way that you need to look at it. So supporting organizations like AzCDL is extremely important because they are our first line of defense. And ultimately, if you can stop it in the states, they probably won't be able to get very far nationally because their state legislatures and governors are going to tell people in Congress and the Senate and the president, it's not going to work. We tried here, didn't work out.
Yeah, and on the flip side, when it does work in a particular state, then it's easier for that message to spread. California, Chris,
Yep.
what do you say? What do you say about membership?
Yeah, membership in as many Second Amendment rights organizations is critical. And the reason why I say as many as possible is because a lot of organizations have areas of focus or expertise that others don't, right? So for example, right, AzCDL, right, a state level organization who knows the players in Arizona. And that's going to be different than the NRA, perhaps, or Gun Owners of America. Obviously, then there's the Pink Pistols and Operation Blazing Sword, which are very pro-LGBT, pro-2A organizations, right? So the memberships that we all decide to join, all in all, it helps further the cause of freedom and pro-Second Amendment causes that exist. And so it's really about the people. For me, I think it's very easy to just think of the organizations, these pro-gun organizations, as, the NRA and Gun Owners of America and Firearms Policy Coalition, but behind every organization are people who know politicians, who know the movers and shakers in those either communities or in the state, or networking with other nonprofit groups, but the dollars and time that we provide to these organizations through membership or through donating, volunteer time, that's ultimately how we're going to win the fight for our rights.
Oh, absolutely. Very well said. And, you know, the AzCDL, I give them complete credit for the fact that Guns and Ammo magazine has voted Arizona #1 in pro-gun rights for several years running now. So that combined force of people coming together and using their networks of knowing the who's who and forming relationships with the elected officials, all of that absolutely is impactful. And it's amazing to me that Arizona has become a battleground state and is purple-ish as we come into the 2020 election, because we have been such a stronghold for our constitutional rights as far as our Second Amendment goes. But it's that nothing is for sure. And, you know, California used to have the biggest gun shows, used to have, I think, most of the manufacturers in the nation. And just in a matter of a couple of decades, it's very, very different. And it does take all of us individually and in joining memberships. And I'll just say real quickly, you know, the membership for the AzCDL, an entire year membership is $30. $30. I mean, that's practically free. You can get a whole family membership for $80 or be a life member like myself for $300. And I think it's money very well spent because it's an investment in not only your current world, but in your children and your children's children's rights in your state, in this state of Arizona. All right. So as we go out, I will go in reverse order. Chris, how do people follow you and find you on the internet and maybe even buy your book that I see lurking behind you there, Shoot to Win? Looking for his unmute.
Sorry, I'm out of calendar. Were you just asking for us to say where people can follow us?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, cool. So my website, topshotchris.com. I'm also at topshotchris on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Fantastic. And Rolando, how about you? How do people follow the work you're doing?
You can find me individually at Puerto Rican Pistolero on pretty much all the major social media platforms. And you can find the work that Johanna and I do on our show, Locked and Loaded Latinos. We have a podcast every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. It's on all the major platforms, but we do live stream on YouTube on Sunday nights. So you can find both Johanna and I there.
Fantastic. And Johanna?
And you can find me on Instagram and Parlay and Facebook at Latina Locked and Loaded. And again, our podcast, Locked and Loaded Latinos.
Fantastic. And of course, I'm Cheryl Todd of Gun Freedom Radio. And just put a .com on the end of that. You can find all of my shows on our website and all of the major social medias. We are on also azfirearms.com is our small mom and pop's gun shop. We sell guns, ammo, and do some gunsmithing. All right. And of course, you do want to go to our host site, and we thank the AzCDL so much for hosting this tonight, azcdl.org. You can find out all about the wonderful work that they're doing, how you can support them with your time and your finances, and also become a member. Thank you all so much. I so appreciate you coming together and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom and your ideas of how to find unity in diversity. Thank you all so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great, thank you.
Take care, Cheryl.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.